On Friday, a federal judge has blocked an Indiana ban on gender-affirming care for transgender youth. The law, which would ban puberty blockers and hormones, was scheduled to take effect on July 1st, but it will not. It is a temporary injunction, a temporary block. Now, this actually comes from U.S. District Court Judge James Patrick Hanlon. And the order puts a temporary injunction on this legislation. Now, it will allow the law's prohibition on gender-affirming surgeries to take effect, but there's actually a reason for that. He basically says it's not going to affect anybody, so I don't really care. We're not going to rule, we're not going to strike down or block that provision because there's nobody that's going to be infected or affected at all. So what's the point of putting in this surgery, provision when there's no one in the state of Indiana at all under 18 that is getting surgeries in that way? So again, he wrote in this ruling that no medical providers in the state perform procedures on people younger than 18. Hanlon's order also blocks provisions that would prohibit Indiana doctors from communicating with out-of-state doctors about gender-affirming care for their patients younger than 18. The ACLU had filed this lawsuit within hours of Republican Governor Eric Holcomb signing the bill back on April 5th. And so now the challenge, again, on behalf of for use undergoing transgender treatments, and an Indiana doctor provides that care, argued the ban would violate the U.S. Constitution's equal protection guarantees, as well as parental rights for the parents of the children who are, again, supportive in their transition. So I love it when stupid laws get blocked. And this is a stupid law. Again, it's unnecessary and unnecessarily cruel. And the cruelty is, of course, the point, as always. Look, we've seen it by now, hearing after hearing, state after state, the right wing coming out, doing these unnecessary bans. And by the way, in every hearing they get smoked. They go and make the case that it's going to be, that it needs to be banned. Oh, we're protecting the children, the genital mutilation, the G-transitioners, blah, blah. And every time they fail to make the case because they do not have the facts on their side. If you ban gender-affirming care, you're actually harming children. It's not that the gender-affirming care harms children. It doesn't. It helps children who are trans. Now, what's interesting about this as well is that this was a Trump appointee. Hanlon was appointed by former President Donald Trump, wrote that its opponents had demonstrated potential irreparable harm to those undergoing treatment and shown some likelihood of success in arguments that it was unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. The ACLU had provided evidence of risks to minors' health and well-being from gender dysphoria if those treatments can no longer be provided to minors, prolonging of their dysphoria and causing additional distress and health risks, such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicidality, Hanlon said. So, now, here's the thing. They usually start with these bans for, minors, and then they expand it, or try to expand it to adults. So Indiana didn't try to do that yet. But again, at least in some of the states where they have effectively passed these bans, they've moved on to trying criminalizing it for adults. Now, here's what Hanlon also ruled. While the state has identified legitimate reasons for regulation in this area, the designated evidence does not demonstrate, at least at this stage, that the extent of its regulation was closely tailored to uphold those interests. So now the state taking interest, that's supposed to happen when it comes to the health and well-being of children. In this case, the state taking this particular action harms children. We know that because, again, if you do not allow them to have gender-affirming care, that leads to more depression, suicidality, PTSD, all these, terrible outcomes. Now, we also know from experts that regret from transition, the so-called detransitioners, that's extremely rare. And when it happens, it's because of family or societal pressure. So understand that it's not that these people, regret what they've done to their body. No. What's going on is that no one accepted them for their preferred identity. And so they were forced to go back in. They were forced to go back to hiding who they really are to be accepted by their family. Humans are social creatures. You know, we rely on each other. We rely on groups, to survive and thrive. And when you're an outcast, that has severe impacts on your mental health as well. Forcing, again, some of these people, again, very, very, very small amount, about 1% of the already small amount of people who are who identify as transgender in this country anyway, to transition. So, anyway. Now, that said, if you're a detransitioner, that doesn't mean that you're still not trans. I mean, again, it means you were forced into going back into hiding. Now, Republican State Attorney General Todd Rokita, his office said in a statement that it was disappointed in this decision, but claims they will continue to fight for the children. No, that's not reality. You're not fighting for children. You're actually harming children. Now, the statement said the ruling recognizes the state has shown that there's good reasons for regulating gender transition procedures for minors. But it's already regulated. Again, experts in gender transition point out that they generally do not recommend, in the vast majority of cases, that minors, get surgery. They do not require surgical intervention. Okay? In fact, of course, the state makes the argument, or had made the argument, that risks from gender-affirming treatments during puberty, such as future fertility, bone strength, brain development, and possible reversibility, have not been adequately studied by scientists. Such factors, they say, make it within the legislature's authority to decide we don't want our children to be part of this grand experiment. That was from Indiana Solicitor General Thomas Fisher. So, no, you see the framing on that. Their framing is ridiculous. It's not a grand experiment. Again, it's a very small amount of people who identify as transgender and go through gender-affirming care. That's the reality, and transgender people have always existed throughout time. Transgender, gender fluid, as well as gay, the rest of the LGBTQ community have always existed. This is not a grand experiment. This is allowing people to be who they are and to finally live their truth with the miracles of modern science, of which Republicans seem to not believe in. But again, guidelines from authorities on gender-affirming care point out that surgery generally reserved for adults. There are rare exceptions for older teens who meet certain criteria. So already regulated. Now, the other thing that I want to point out here is in Indiana, I may have mentioned already, but they've never performed gender surgeries on minors in that state. The state's only gender-affirming care provider doesn't do that, doesn't provide referrals for anyone doing that. So the reason that I point that out, again, is that it also goes back to, for example, the trans bans in sports, where you've had states that have banned this and don't have any examples of trans girls in sports on their sports teams through the entire state. This is a solution, so-called solution, in search of a problem. I'm glad that this was blocked. I know it's temporary, but again, it should hopefully get completely struck down as unconstitutional, because that's exactly what it is. Just leave people alone. Let them do, let them live their lives. Let parents be parents, by the way, and let people be people.